Welcome to LifePoint TV. I'm Pastor Dale Phillips, your host for LifePoint, your path to real life. If you joined us in this study series, I'm just enjoying the presence of God in this revelation concerning the word grace. We are learning, have learned the scriptures that we are following show us and teach us, are teaching us that grace is God's work. Grace is God's ability to work in our life where we are insufficient. Hold on to that thought. Grace, properly defined from its Hebrew root, it describes and illustrates a superior God uh, bending over, stooping down to give kindness, favor, blessing to an inferior, ministering to the needs of the inferior from the hand of the superior. God stooping down to reach you and I in the very place of our need. Our premise is being driven from what we learned in Romans chapter 5, verse 1 and 2, and the verses following that describe the work of God that justifies us, aligns us, brings us into salvation, and our faith in the justification, the alignment that God has established in our life, and giving us access. Verse 2 says in Romans chapter 5, giving us access to grace so that we now have peace with God. We're no longer at odds. We're not in war. We're not in conflict against God. We're at peace with God. Why? Because of where we stand, standing in his grace. We have that access that's been open to us, that place of grace. And what I've been hammering in each one of these teachings is you need to stay in that place, in that position of grace. Don't try to wiggle out and stand on your own. God's not expecting nor desiring for us to graduate from grace to walking in our own power. If we are saved by grace, then we have to live and walk by grace every day. I need him not some days. I need him every day. I want to uh, uh, build on that point where we left off concerning Paul's personal testimony, the necessity that he discovered having to live needing God's grace for his insufficiencies. I told you to underline, to hold on to that thought. In his wrestling, we looked at this in the last teaching in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, the conclusion of that conversation where God says to him, my grace is sufficient for thee. He teaches Paul that in the areas where he is weak, God is always strong. It is always the superior that ministers to the inferior. It's never the other way around. It's never the inferior striving to become the superior and being able to walk away from the superior, suggesting that the inferior can be independent. No, the inferior is also always reliant on the superior. And God says to Paul, your weaknesses are settled by God's grace. In other words, God's grace is sufficient for all of our insufficiencies. Now, in the world of banking, there is something called insufficient funds. So if you have money in the bank and you write a check that goes beyond the amount that you have in your bank account, you're going to get a notification that says, watch this, insufficient funds. Over the last, decade or more, they've come up with protective programs to allow you to have an account, watch this, connected to your primary checking account that says that, hey, if you go over your amount in this checking account, we got this other fund over here where it will automatically cover the difference. I want you to understand God's grace in that same analogy where we are weak. God says, don't worry about it. I got you covered. I have an account that has more than enough to cover your insufficiency. And what I like about it now, the bank, they're going to charge you a fee. I mean, so you gotta decide. I can either take the hit on the insufficient funds, and the check doesn't clear, and then they're gonna, not only will I owe the face value of the check, but now I'm gonna also owe this extra $25, $30 fee for the insufficient fund. Or if I tell them, hey, I want you to transfer from this account to this account over here, there's still a processing fee in many cases for that. So you're still gonna have a fee for the overdraft. But God says, no fee. I simply want you to understand that every check you write in life, I cover the insufficiency. Where you are weak, God says, I am strong. This is why the Bible teaches, let the weak say, oh, I like this, I am strong. Wait a minute, you might have missed the point. See, I don't have enough to cover my statement of being strong. So I'm really saying, I'm in a weak position. I don't have everything that is required for me to declare my strength, but I can still say I'm strong. Why? Because God's got me covered. I can still say that even though I feel lower, that I'm going to rise up and be stronger. Why? Because God has me covered. His grace, his superior power is always bending over, stooping down to give me what I need. Powerful, powerful is the work of God in the absence or in the presence of the weakness of man and the absence of what he cannot do. I want you to stay encouraged. God's grace is sufficient for you. Stay on the path that leads to real life.